I will now start with Marc-André SELOSSE introduction. Can herbaria tell us about how plants and microbes used to interact in the past? Are viruses alive? What is a truffle? We are the first ancestor of mycorrhizae recruited by orchids from endophytic microbes. These are just a few examples of the question of the large diversity of biological questions addressed by our first guest speaker this morning. Marc-André SELOSSE, in the course of his scientific career, has done most of his research focused on ecology and evolution of mycorrhizae, a major symbiosis between soil fungi and roots of most land plants, as well as evolution of symbiosis in general. Professor at Muséum d'Histoire Naturelle in Paris, at the University of Cummings in China and Gdansk in Poland, President of the Federation of Land Society Biogé, member of the French Academy of Agriculture and of Institut Universitaire de France, Marc-André SELOSSE has published more than 200 papers in international peer-reviewed journals. He has also published outreach books in French on microbiota, Jamais seul, Tannins, Les goûts et les couleurs du monde, and Soil, l'origine du monde. Throughout all these publications, and more recently in several editorials in Le Monde, Marc-André SELOSSE is trying to enlighten us about the illusion of autonomy in life. Interdependency is probably the real defining characteristic of life and biodiversity, its expression. There is no such thing as solitude, especially in biodiversity. Only if we can fully comprehend that, we will be able to understand that biodiversity is indeed a central tool for our future. Professor SELOSSE, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I thank you a lot for this invitation and the opportunity to share with you a few ideas about biodiversity. The fact is that there are many misconceptions about biodiversity. The first one is the one at the very origin, where biodiversity was coined by naturalists, people studying species, making inventories of plants or animals, to fight against molecular biology, to try to have a kind of name, an attractive name, to get the money that was in the 80s, 90s, flowing to molecular biology. It was a way to fight against molecular biology, whereas myself or Chris, that will speak later, we use molecular biology now to describe the biodiversity. So there is no more such an opposition to do. But the other misconcepts about biodiversity are still very active. For example, if you go on internet and Google, for those of you who have open computer and link to internet, just Google for image about biodiversity, you will see nice coral reefs, nice forest, animals and plants. That is nothing like biodiversity is. Why? The first thing is that some parts of biodiversity are not nice at all. The virus that was hitting the human beings in the last years belongs to biodiversity. AIDS is a consequence of biodiversity as well. Devastation of spoilage of food, parasites of cultures. This is something bad by biodiversity as well. So biodiversity is not necessarily pretty, not necessarily good, it is. Dot. And we have this kind of positive view of it, but that's a detail. The second problem for me with this view of list of animals, list of plants, is that this is not biodiversity. Merci. If you look at this grass, thank you for bringing it to me, there is not a lot of biodiversity from your eyes, I guess. But for me, what's interesting is what's below it. And I've been bringing you two pieces of biodiversity which are highly biodiverse here. The first one is this piece of soil. In this piece of soils, there are probably thousands of species of bacteria, probably about 1,000 species of fungi, 100 species of amoebas, I don't know how many viruses. We were just discussing that making the number of viruses in samples is not so easy, and for soil, we don't know it much. That's highly diverse. There is more species here than the most costly zoo you could buy a ticket for. Okay? The second sample of biodiversity is there. I have 10 to 14 human cells, but I have the same number of bacterial or yeast cells on my skin, and believe me, I had a shower yesterday, but still, in my gut, in my ears, in my nose, every surface or cracks or holes in my body is filled with microbes, and the total number of species is, let's say, about 5,000. It varies a lot. I shall come back on that very soon. Biodiversity is microbial. Most of the lineage of life are microscopic. They are made of cells which are separate or in very small clusters with a size of 1 micron for bacteria to 10, 100 microns for eukaryotic cells. That's biodiversity. And some rare lineages, they escaped this unicellular status to become pluricellular. Those are the plants, those are the algae, those are the animals and some fungi. And we believe that biodiversity is made of what we see, whereas it's largely done or made of what we cannot see. And that's the point, that the biodiversity is what we don't see. There is even more. Recently, there was this idea that published for Europe that over 30 years we've been destroying 80% of the insects, and over 15 years we've been destroying, over 30 years 80% of insects, over 15 years 30% of birds. I was attacked on these figures recently by a YouTuber that tried to demonstrate that there is no problem currently with biodiversity on the following reason: no species disappeared, or very few disappeared. That's true. Most of those figures, which are based on populations, are done by a terrible reduction of the number of individuals in each species. But there is very few species that disappeared yet. Still, when the number goes down, you are in the direction of species disappearing. For example, there are still white rhinos, 2 females. So formally, the species is not extinct. There are still 2 females. Okay? So that's a bad trend. But yes, in terms of species, there is nothing disappeared, or very few species of insects or birds disappeared in Europe. Still, look at your neighbors. Look at them. Do they look like you? Of course, it's largely because they are not trained, dressed as you. But a large part of the reason why they don't look like you is that they are genetically different. You are in a species where the genetic differences are not so acute. On average, 2 human beings just differ by 1% of their DNA. And it's not 1% of their genes. They have fairly the same genes. Simply, there are small mutations or point differences, okay? But still, this is a biodiversity, isn't it? This is the genetic biodiversity within the species. And to go further with that, if you were bacterial, and looking at your neighbor, you would hardly recognize that he's from the same species, because you know the rule in bacteria, you are from the same species when you share more than 3/4, 70%, 75% of your DNA. Okay? This is because in bacteria there is a lot of gene exchanges, and within one species of bacteria, you have individuals that differ a lot by the genes they have, not only the sequence of the same genes they would have. No, they have different genes due to those gene exchanges. So there is a biodiversity within the species, and when you reduce the number of individuals, you reduce the biodiversity in terms of genetic diversity within the species. I shall also add, but I will not be long on that, that there is a biodiversity made of the assembly of species, the ecosystems, or the communities you have around you. It's also a kind of biodiversity, but I will not be long on that. You see, here that with genetic diversity within the species, we again face something that is hardly visible. You are sensitive to that, but for many people, losing individuals is, as long as the species didn't disappear, not losing biodiversity, whereas it's false. But I would like to stress out that this idea that biodiversity is also made of nasty things, that biodiversity is largely made of microbes, and that biodiversity is also genetic within the species, all that is still not biodiversity, or at least we don't care of that. What we care of is the fact that each species, when it lives somewhere, is modifying the environment. And the sum of the modification of all the species that are living at a given place is simply making the environmental conditions at that place. This is the functional biodiversity. That is the fact that each species is modifying the environment and making what the environment actually is. That's very important to stress out that, because that's building our lives. For example, here, there are some decomposers which are eating the organic matter and recycling nitrogen and phosphorus. There may be some nitrogen fixation. There is also some bacteria that are living on the rocks and actively with acid secretions liberating iron, phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, etc. They are just mining to get some food. And by the way, they liberate a lot in the soil as well. So the plant profit from this attack of the rocks by the microbial biofilms. There are some others that are just running through the soil and making pores, like amoebas. The amoebas here, they are just running in the soil to catch bacteria and making very small, delicate pores which retain the water and allow the soil to be rich in water, to retain it by capillarity. What else? What can I see again? There are some mushrooms. That's why we are working on with my teams. Some mushrooms that are just associating also with the roots of the plants. And in exchange for sugar, they provide the plants with minerals that they catch in the soil. So they contribute to convey the food to the plant. What can I see more? When they go to death, most of those microbes, they are too small to be. They are in cracks of clays. They are in cracks of the rocks. They are attacking. This organic matter, you know what, is not accessible to other microbes because it's in teeny holes, and most of the organic matter in soil is not made by the remains of plants, but by the dead microbes, which are hardly accessible because they are in cracks or in rocks to others. It's a stable organic matter. The dead body of the microbes is a stable organic matter that has an effect on climate, because it's one sink for carbon. It's a carbon that is in soil and not in terms of CO2 in the atmosphere. So that this has some impact on the climate. It's carbon storing. Let's come back to me now. I have also a lot of microbes, and you know what? We discovered that those microbes are not, as I was said when I was a student, simply living there because there is food, heating, and protection. Of course, they're eating my skin or the rest of my old pieces of skin or secretions. Of course, they are eating a part of what I put in my digestive tract. But the truth is that if they profit of it, I do profit of it as well. And to be very short on something that could make hours of speaking, we discover now that they are co-driving our bodies. We discover it because the Occidental people, they live in a way, their kind of food, their kind of hygiene, the molecules, the antioxidants, the emulsifiers, and so on, they put in their creams, soaps, and food is killing their microbes. And when you compare me and someone living in the Amazonia or the stools of my ancestors, which are more or less preserved, when you compare in terms of microbiota, that's the word I didn't pronounce, but those community of microbes living on and in me, those are the microbiota. When we compare us in terms of microbiota to people living in a non-occidental way or people that were our ancestors, we reveal that we have 1.5 to 3 times less diversity of bacteria and yeast. On the way, we lost some nasty guys. So, in a way, it's better. But by reducing this number, we start to lose some of the functions they achieve. And we realize now that most of the modern illness, those illnesses that didn't exist or were very rare in the 19th century, they are partly, not fully, but partly linked to the biodiversity loss of our microbiota. Illness such as metabolic illness, diabetes, obesity, immune system problems, allergy, asthma, or Crohn's diseases, of multiple sclerosis, where the immune system is attacking the body, they are partly linked to the fact that the microbiota is poor in species. And we have also the same with some neural diseases or problems, such as autism, Parkinson, Alzheimer, and even, it seems, nervous breakdown. It seems, and it's demonstrated by experiment on mice, but also microbiota transfer between humans, where normal-looking individuals, they can restore a more normal phenotype in people that are ill when you transfer their microbiota. So we have fairly good evidence that a part of those modern problems, which impact 1/4 of European people, is due to a reduction in diversity in some individuals of the diversity of the microbiota, especially in the gut, but also for asthma in the lung. And it's causal, not a consequence. Of course, those illnesses are complex. They have a genetic determinism. It depends also on the way you are living, on your environment. So there are multiple causes, but one of the causes is the reduction of microbial biodiversity. And it means that normally, the way we are making reserves, the way we are regulating the immune system, the way we are regulating the functioning of the brain is also due to molecules that are emitted by the microbiota and that contribute, together with our homeostasis and own regulation, to make the normal functioning of our metabolism, our immune system, or our nervous system. That's the point, exactly the point where the loss of biodiversity is harming us the most. The loss of biodiversity of our microbiota, which contributes to those modern illness which are affecting 1/4 of people. That's functional diversity, and by the way, that's where, if you don't see it, you face it. In other words, we've been ignoring the fact that biodiversity is not a list of species, is not something that should morally be preserved. It's simply what makes our environment fertile, and it's what is making our health. In other words, we cannot longer ignore that biodiversity should be preserved, because this is the way of preserving ourselves. We have to stop telling the society that biodiversity should be preserved. If you don't have money to buy a food that is made in a way that preserves biodiversity, you buy what you can buy. And you cannot make reproach to people for that. But collectively, we have to allow the system to produce food by preserving the biodiversity, for example, in the fields. We have to offer the people a way of living that preserves biodiversity, because otherwise we have a health problem. We have problem of sustainability of the environment, like the fertility of soil. And if we don't provide that, we simply dislike, we don't support our children. That's the thing. And so I said that biodiversity is not made of big organisms, it's made of small organisms. Okay. That it's also genetic. Okay. That most of it is functional. Biodiversity, okay. But finally, the truth is that biodiversity, it's us. It's us. There is a strong link to the environment. And you know what? Your calcium, your magnesium, your iron, your, what you would like to have, nitrogen, it comes from there, where it was extracted by some microbes. For nitrogen, it's from the atmosphere that goes into the soil by nitrogen-fixing bacteria. Then it was conveyed to plant by mushrooms, by fungi. Then it went into a plant, and I don't know if you were getting this nitrogen from a salad or from an animal that was grazing, but you know, you are intimately linked to this biodiversity, intimately. The minerals you contain, they were handled by microbes before they reached you. So now let's reverse the story. If it is so powerfully doing things in us, then if we realize that, it's a tool. And I will make you 2 examples of that to finish. In the Yuanyang, in the south of China, there is a place where farmers are very old style. Very, they are producing rice without pesticides. But the fact is that they have no problem with parasites. And this paradox, whereas they get 7 to 10 tons of rice per hectare, which is in the range of tropical productivity. This was fascinating some scientists from Montpellier, the team especially of Jean-Benoît Morel. They went there with sociologists to investigate why the hell they had such. They are producing rice since millennia. They should have an accumulation of pathogens. They don't have it. And they discovered that there is a simple rule over there. You have all your rice, you harvest it, you get some seeds, you put some seeds on the side, and when you visit someone, there is this tradition that the person gives you a bit of seeds, first thing, and no advice, second thing. You don't say, take my seeds, they are excellent. No. You just give the seeds, and they are pooled with your own seeds that you were harvesting the previous year. The result is that there is in a field of a farmer more diversity of rice than in France, than planted in the southern France. Okay, it's highly diverse, and I think you get the point. If a fungus is able to attack one plant, one rice, the neighbor is so genetically different that if the fungus is successful here, it will likely not be successful here. And would it be successful here? It will not be successful there. The propagation of the pathogen is severely impaired. But in France, we have someone that was claiming that and making experiment, not with old varieties, but simply by mixing modern varieties. Claude Pope de Valavieille, in Versailles, has been spending, she's now retired, I think, but she's been spending decades to study and demonstrate that. No one cares. But the fact is that propagation of pathogens is so slow that you don't need pesticides. Or you need much less pesticides. So that's using genetic biodiversity as a tool. And by the way, by having less pesticides, when you eat this rice, you harm less your own internal biodiversity. Now, second thing, how can I sustain my microbiota? Because I want to be healthy. As you know, of course, you should avoid emulsifiers, antioxidant, and all those molecules added to the food or to the soaps you are using. Use dry soap. Use fresh food as much as you can and not processed food. But you have to feed your bacteria in the gut. And this is what fibers are doing. We know that in Europe we are eating half of the ratio of the level of fibers from vegetables we should eat. We don't feed enough our bacteria. And then the question is, shall I eat strawberries? Shall I eat apples? Or porrets? Or tomatoes? Or potatoes? Or which are the good fibers to support the diversity of your microbiota? It depends on the species of bacteria. Some will take profit of what they find in tomato, others will take profit of what they find in turnip, etc., etc. Eat a diversity. Eat more vegetables and fruits, and eat a diversity of it. The advice is to eat 25 species of plant per week, cereals included. It's not so easy, huh? But that's the recommendation. During winter, it's a problem, because then you have to eat some things that comes from very far, and it's not so doable. But you know, colorful table, colorful salads, that's the idea. You have to support your microbial biodiversity by a biodiversity of food. Just tool again. And I finish now with another tool. I would like to stress out that some models of production we lost. We lost some way of managing the agriculture that are based on species biodiversity, and I will give you two examples of how we can restore that. First example is the use of mix of species on the same ground, on the same field. For example, agroforestry, where you have tree growing above cereals, for example. The second example could be a mix of legumes and cereals on the same field, planted together. You, of course, imagine that there is competition. And there is competition. You will get less cereals than if you have a pure cereal field when you mix. But let's now harvest all that, even the wood at the end of that, and let's imagine, let's measure how much you got of wood and cereals, okay, and let's calculate what surface of pure forest or pure cereal you would need to get the same. And you find wine as on an hectare of mix, and you find that to get the same amount of wood and cereal as on 1 hectare of agroforestry, of mix of the two, you need 1.4 hectares. That's the result of the team of Christian Duprat in INRA Montpellier again. Some people, especially in INRA Lusignan, but not only, were investigating what surface you need to get the same yield of cereals and legumes as on 1 hectare of mixed culture, and they find 1.4. In some mixes, you even go to 2 or 2.5 hectares, especially when you mix trees and vegetables and tomatoes, etc. The idea is that there is not only competition. First, you better use all the resources, because the trees and the cereals, they don't have their leaves at the same season. The cereals have leaves earlier than the trees. So the actual competition for light between cereals and trees, it's 2 months only. Then you harvest the cereals and there is only the trees. So you better use the time. You better use the space, because for the roots, the trees have deep roots, and they have especially deep roots because they are bored by the cereals at the surface of soil, so they go deeper. So you better exploit the depth of the soil than simply with cereals. So yes, there is competition, but you better use the resources spatially and temporally. Plus, in the case of cereals and legumes, it's not what I tell you with this idea that you produce more on 1 hectare mixed and by separating the cultures. It's not any mix. It's the mix that are well done, okay? Of course, we will only use those ones. And the mix of cereals and legumes is very good because the legumes, they are fixing nitrogen, then they release a bit for the cereals. And inversely, the cereals, they mobilize the iron, which is made available for everyone. So there are also positive synergies. And the Cereals plus Legumes Association is an example of that. That dates back, by the way, to maize plus beans that the pre-Columbians, the Amerindians, before we teach them the modern agriculture, were doing. So you see that not only in this example I produce more, but also I reply to this old stupid wording when you offer agroecology. Oh yes, because that's the word of it. Agroecology, using ecology to make another agriculture. When you are discussing agroecology with people, they tell you, oh yeah, well, it's very interesting, but we have to feed the humanity. Fuck. Okay? If it's to be fed with pesticides and fed with the cadmium that is brought by the fertilizer, I don't want that, okay? The fact is that whenever you hear someone telling you, we have to feed humanity, that's the hallmark that you will have a toxic wording. This is people that didn't study the facts, the studies, or even the way some farmers are producing. My last example, and shortly, is for the I will need help. Chris, comment est-ce qu'on appelle une haie en anglais? Une haie dans un champ? Hedge. Merci. So I will discuss briefly with you hedges. We were destroying hedges in France. We destroyed 1,400,000 kilometers of hedges since the 70s. At the same time, we had pesticides. And we didn't realize that one of the functions was to limit the bioaggressors, to limit the propagation of illness from one field to another, plus to harbor birds or even insects that are killing the bioaggressors. Adding hedges is, on average, reducing the bioaggressors level by 80%. Of course, we substituted some pesticides, so we didn't see that when we suppressed them, and we still do suppress them, by the way, because even if we get money to replant hedges, it's 5,000 kilometers per year, we destroy 20,000 at the same time. So we go on destroying more than we pay for planting. Plus, a young one is not like an old one, because an old one had time to accumulate this biodiversity of birds, insects, bats, and so on, that are protecting. The young ones, they are less effective in protection. Plus, they are also protecting against erosion. They are protecting against wind, which is very important when you have very dry summer. You have to avoid that the air above the plant is replaced by dry air. It's very protective to limit the wind. Plus, it's fixing 100 tons of carbon per kilometer. Yes. It's fixing carbon. Of course, you have to cut it regularly, and with what you cut, you can make some mulching to limit the growth of plant, yet on small surface, but however, you can use it as a soil cover to avoid herbicides. Probably not on the whole field, but still. So, you see, it's multifunctional, it's bringing a lot of things, and by the way, if you have hedges, you have a biodiversity that is, in terms of species number, increased by 60%. That's average figures, and it highly depends on where you are and which type of hedge you imagine. But that's the point. You see, it's a tool. It will not be a tool for everything. I'm pretty sure that we'll still need pesticides and things like that, but let's use it as much as we can. Biodiversity is not only something that we have to protect. It's just something we have to learn using, because it can contribute to our health and our the sustainability of the environment where we are living, and so it can contribute to our children's well-being. We really have to shift our minds for that, and we are in a civilization that believes in chemistry and technology very easily, but doesn't see life as a tool, and we have to learn that. You know, when some food is falling on the ground, the question, it's funny because I'm often asked this question by journalists. When some food gone on the soil, can we eat it? And the idea behind is that, isn't there some nasty bacteria that will kill us? The answer is that, even if it's falling on a sheet of dog, you hardly will die. But the true question is, how was the floor washed? What products were used? What are the chemicals there? Because the repetitive exposition to those things, even if it's not because of food that you pick on the ground, but just because you are smelling the dust that comes from the ground, that's the toxic issue, okay? But when it's chemical, we are not so afraid. When it's biologic, we have to change our culture and to really, become better in biology. I know most of you are good in biology, but our societies are very bad, have a very low level in biology. Our society still thinks that the quality of a training for the next generation is mathematics, writing, reading. It's true. But the truth is that the first thing everyone does, even the day where you don't read, the days where you don't write, the days where you don't calculate, and I hope you will have some days like that. I think that on those days you will eat. You will buy things with an impact on your environment, because when it was produced, it had some impact on the environment. Maybe you will fuck on that day. The fact is that you will have a biological life. Okay, and having a proper sexuality, it's something we hardly do. That's a way of respecting biodiversity, you know, respecting the other sex. That's something we hardly can do, it seems, in our societies. All that, this learning what being alive means and what opportunity it gives, but also what it forbides to us, this is something we have to learn more. This is the fundamental. And by the way, for this, you quickly will understand that you need to write, read, and make mathematics and calculate, of course. But still, we have to go back to biology. Because, and to finish, as Jérôme Barkhoff, an evolutionist that was introducing evolution into psychology, a Canadian guy, Jérôme Barkhoff, was saying, biology is a destiny only if you ignore it. And that's the same for biodiversity, by the way. I thank you for your attention.
Okay. Thank you very much, Marc-André, for this enthusiastic talk.
Thank you very much for this very interesting presentations. I have two questions if we have time. The first question is, what do you think about land use changes? Because we talked, for example, yesterday about the problem of greenhouse gases by breedings, etc. But we know that, in fact, in pastures, we do have much more biodiversity, not only in terms of plants, but microbes, than in even forest often. So what do you think about this, like the environment that push to change land use, but also what is it for biodiversity?
It's a complex question, but one part of the answer is that we have a level of artificialization which is not very sound. We artificialize in France like 5 football plays each hour, even during the night. That means that when the cities, the railways, the Gare Champagne-Ardenne, for example, is a scandal, there was already a railway station. So it's bizarre to have another one, okay? When all those things, the industry, this kind of suburban habitats are growing, they are covering agricultural soil, and we lose in France a surface that could feed the city of Le Havre for 1 year. We lose it every year. So we really are losing tools, and we are now also losing it with agro-photovoltaism, which is also a problem. And we lose the biodiversity that is functioning there, because under a city you don't have all what you have here. And that's the point. I think that we have to revise this. We had a law in France, by the way, to stop this, but it was a bit destroyed by the local politics. They influenced the Senate to modify it, because they don't know how to make a safe economy without growing the city. But that's the first problem I see, because this is destroying a lot of biodiversity, and it's also true for new highways. Don't think of a specific example, please. Sorry for those who are not French, but there is a joke with the current news. We cut the communications between the right and the left side of the road or the high-speed train and so on. And this is not good, because you need to have large population to maintain their diversity. So in all, that's the main problem I can see. Now, if your example was bringing us to a second question, which is that of meat or no meat, grow cattle or not. It's true that cattle are producing glasshouse gases like methane. By the way, they are not doing that. Their bacteria are doing that, to be exact. That's the diversity, the gut of cattle. But on the other way, we need a bit of meat. We need 10 to 20 kilograms of meat per year. It doesn't mean that you cannot survive without eating meat. You can. You just have to be very careful to get sufficient vitamin from other sources. But that's healthy to have 10 to 20 kilograms of meat per year. We are omnivorous. We eat currently 80 to 90 kilograms of meat per year. And it's not healthy. It's making vascular strokes, cancers of the digestive tract. We are eating too much of meat. So let's come back to less meat, and we will have more place to produce vegetables. So the productivity will be less of a concern. So less pesticide, if it means less production, will not be a problem. You see, it's linked to that. And still, we have to leave a bit of cattle, and we have to leave the type of cattle growing that is good for climate. What is good for climate? The ones that are living outside, that are grazing. Since they are grazing, whenever a plant is grazed, it kills its unnecessary roots, which make carbons in the soil. This organic matter of dead roots is feeding microbes and life and high diversity of things, but also it makes soon an organic matter that is stored in soil. So it's a carbon sink, a pasture. And it pays a bit for the gashouse effect of the cattle. Okay, that's an important thing. So let's have outdoor cattle production, and let's have the meat that is from that, but let's indeed reduce the level of cattle. And you are right that grasslands are very biodiverse in plants, but also in microbes. They are carbon storing, and they are one of the things you can imagine. Or just maybe put trees with that, okay? Like apple trees in Normandy. And you will have a very nice soil. So there are really, yes, there are questions like that. We made an agriculture that is not fitting our health and that is very impacting because we, among other problems, try to produce too much meat.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and so my second question is maybe a bit more fundamental, but I was wondering when we talked about the biodiversity, we were like, I know that you talk about the genetic, but it seems to be quite focus on the taxonomic diversity. But I was wondering about the functional biodiversity, because we know that we have a lot of functional redundancy in microbes. So I would say that you can maintain a species and we would say, oh, that's great because all of my species are maintained. But the function inside of species can potentially disappear. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's even more true if the number of individuals that of the population is going down, because you may lose a few individuals that have the trait of interest. The fact is that most of the functional diversity is made by microbes. And in microbial functional biodiversity, there is indeed a lot of redundancy. That's why we didn't notice this problem that losing taxonomic diversity or even genetic diversity means losing functional diversity, because there is redundancy. But you see that in human bodies, we reached a point where we start to lose functional diversity by losing species. And yeah, we are lucky that there is redundancy, but there will be no redundancy forever and for free.
Maybe we have time for one last question, Hélène?
Thank you for this very nice and interesting talk. I am wondering if we have any idea about the evolution of the microbial diversity in the soil since million years.
In the soil?
Yes.
No. What we can reconstruct is what and how plowing, for example, or some pesticides like glyphosate are modifying the soil. But the fact is that it's very hard to know if agriculture was able to push to extinction some soil microbes. We hardly can conclude on that. Because the issue is the following one. There are two types of soils. The ones that are fertile and the ones that are less fertile. On the less fertile, we left the forests. That's the soil where, when organic matter falls on the ground, it decomposes slowly, so there are leaves on the soil, okay? And there are richer soil where, when organic matter falls on the ground, it's immediately disappearing because it's eaten by microbes or covered by sheet of worms. That's what happens here. We hardly see here some dead leaves. And there were forests on such soils, but they were all cut to make agriculture, to make pastures and so on. There were forests of marples. Do you know any forest of marples around? No, they were all cut. So we cannot take the forest as an extant equivalent of the time zero for agricultural soils. It's very important because some people pretend the opposite, but no, those are low fertility soils. They will not tell us what is on them. But one thing is that we can assume this biodiversity by other means that was in the soils that were used for agriculture. And there is not a lot of evidence that species disappeared. When you make regenerative agriculture by not plowing and permanently covering the soil, you get, even if you use glyphosate to kill the vegetation before planting the next harvest, you have 25% more bacterial biomass, so you get higher in individual numbers, but you have, that's meta-analysis that say that, of many works, more than, in the one I think of, it's more than 250 papers that are included in that. The taxonomic diversity is enhanced by 2%. So really nothing. It seems that agriculture was not killing the soil, as some people pretend. It was just reducing the number of individuals, but it was not probably able, in temperate regions, I speak here for temperate regions, okay, able to kill many species. But once again, the time zero is lost.
Can I ask my question? Okay. Thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting. Since you're talking about meat consumption, I would like to ask if you had any information regarding the effect of a vegetarian diet on gut microbiota, and especially is there a shift, and if so, is it for better or for worse? Thank you.
There is absolutely a shift because the gut microbiota is fed by what you eat. And when you stop eating meat, some bacteria don't find their resources, exactly as when you don't eat sufficient diversity of vegetables, some bacteria don't find their resources. There are especially some bacteria which are producing trimethylamine, okay? And this trimethylamine is a derivative of, I don't remember what, from meat. Can someone help here? Anyway, they are eating meat, and they produce this TMA, trimethylamine. And trimethylamine is made into trimethylamine oxide by the liver, and this is very bad for the vascular system. It's enhancing the risk of vascular accident. So when you become vegetarian, and especially if you become vegetarian, that is no milk and no eggs, you lose those bacteria. And it's better for health. But once again, when you are eating only vegetables, you have some problem with some vitamins like D or E or K, I think. And you have to be very careful that your level is good. You can compensate either by pills or by some specific vegetables, but you have to be very careful. That's the point. But then, if you really exclude any animal food, you have a very different microbiota. And I discussed one aspect of functional biodiversity that is rather better. There is no evidence that the microbiota, on average, is better when you are vegetarian, only vegetal eating. That's not very obvious. And that's not very likely. We are not selected, and our microbiota is not selected to have such a reduction of food diversity, like no meat, no milk, no eggs.
Thank you very much, Marc, André. I think we are going for a break now. So, okay.